So good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Emilio Tavarez, and I'm the Policy Director for Hunger Free America. And I'm also serving as the Board President for NASW-NYC. And so I've just started my term, and I wanted to combine my two passions around my work, which are like social workers and the role that we play in solving systemic issues, and then also the work I do at Hunger Free America around hunger specifically. So I have a short presentation that I'm going to go through to just level set and provide some like background information before we talk to our esteemed panel of speakers. But I appreciate everybody being here tonight. So just to get started, this works. Okay, great. So these are our panelists. Actually, if you want to introduce yourself for a couple minutes, starting with Joel.
Hi, I'm Joel Berg. Thank you so much, Emilio, for your work you do every day with us at Hunger Free America and for your work with the National Association of Social Workers New York City chapter. I should say my mother was a social worker, had an MSW, and I have one social worker joke. How many social workers does it take to screw in a light bulb? Anyone? The number doesn't matter. What matters is you meet them where they are. That's my social work joke. I've been with this group for 21 years. This June will be 22 years. It started when I joined it 21 years ago as a relatively small New York City organization, the New York City Coalition Against Hunger, and I've built it into a national organization with support from just some world-class staff and a great board of directors. And before that, I worked for 8 years in the Clinton administration, working for the Secretary of Agriculture. And no, I brought home no documents that are classified that are in my garage, just for the record. And before that, I worked on political campaigns for a living, presidential campaigns, and ran some congressional campaigns. I grew up in Rockland County, New York, and last 21 and a half years, I've lived in Brooklyn, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight.
Thank you. And a couple of the things I appreciate about Joel are his historical knowledge and his sense of humor. So you saw both of those there.
Only one of which gets me in trouble sometimes.
But not tonight. So Shanequa,
no, not tonight.
You want to introduce yourself as well, Shanequa?
Sure. I love it, Joel. I love the light bulb joke. I didn't know what the end of it was going to be, but it did make me laugh. So it's an honor to be with all of you tonight. I'm Shanequa Moore, the Chief Executive Officer and founder of I Raise Girls and Boys International Corporation, where we work to help families of color that are in poverty or in low-income households to provide holistic services so that they can thrive. We do that through addressing a number of structural issues like poverty, food insecurity, which is what we're talking about tonight, mental health challenges, and many other things. And I've been doing that for 10 years strong. Prior to that, I was in New York State government as a state investigator, as well as served as a social worker in a number of the largest organizations out in New York City. And I'm honored to be here tonight with you all and to address this very important topic. I'm also serving as the Vice President of the NASW New York City chapter, along with our amazing President, Emilio. Great to be here.
Thank you. And it's been a pleasure to get to know Shanequa, as we both are on the board. And also previously, you may know that she ran for office. So excited to keep the work going. And then our third speaker, just texted me, Assemblymember Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas is a resident of Queens. She represents Queens and has a lot of experience in the reproductive justice movement. So she's running a few minutes late, so she will be here, but I will have her introduce herself a little bit later. By the time I'm done with my short presentation, she'll be with us. And I just wanted to level set a little bit around what hunger looks like these days. It changes every year, and at Hunger Free America, we do our best to both capture what is happening in hard numbers, like how many people are hungry, but then also highlighting people's stories and lived experience with the programs that we're going to talk about. So we just did the introductions. I'm going to go over a little bit of data and like qualitative information as well. And then we'll get into the discussion between our panelists. I also encourage audience questions throughout. There's a couple of folks on the Zoom, like monitoring the chat. So I'm very interactive and happy to jump to a question. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about next steps for social workers. Like there's so much to do in this work, starting with continuing education, and we'll touch about that later. But I see, Jessica, you just joined. If you want to introduce yourself for a minute or two.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas. I use she, her, pronouns. I am an assembly member representing Western Queens, the neighborhoods of Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, Woodside, and Astoria. And I'm really committed to addressing hunger across the state, and been really excited to work alongside you all in pushing forward a number of bills that will do so. So thank you for having me here. And apologies, I'm in a Amtrak lounge, so it might be a little bit noisy, so I'll mute myself. But thanks for having me.
I appreciate you having you here, and we'll definitely talk about those bills as we go. But first, I wanted to just introduce a little bit of Hunger Free America and some hunger facts. So we're a national group. We're based in New York City. As Joel mentioned, we used to be called the New York City Coalition Against Hunger. I joined the team about 4 years ago, right after grad school, actually. And it was my MSW program at Lehman that actually showed me the policy side of social work. We do focus a lot on the clinical work that is very important. But I really had been doing a lot of enrollment assistance for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, the modern day food stamp program. After joining the team and learning a lot from Joel about the policy realm, have been really happy to take on management responsibilities and really lead our advocacy. This picture here is me and Joel with Congressman McGovern, who represents Massachusetts, and some other of our team and community members visiting Washington, D.C. for the White House Conference on Hunger that just happened last fall. And then, some of our national programming is we run the USDA Hunger Hotline, so anybody can call these two numbers here, and our staff will handle their calls in English and Spanish. Basically, we'll connect anybody across the country with anti-hunger resources near them, whether it's a food pantry, a soup kitchen, a SNAP office, a WIC office, a site for summer meals, or whatever else is available. We do our best. And then in New York City specifically, we have a team that is a different department that does SNAP and WIC enrollment already. I don't have to tell you that being a caseworker is exhausting, so I don't miss that too much, but I'm glad that we still do it as an agency. And so we publish a national hunger report every fall using census data across the nation, and then also breaking that down by states. So our latest report is called Empty Your Plates: Hunger Reduction Advances Eaten Up by Aid Cuts and Inflation, basically making a reference to the fact that a lot of the pandemic era flexibilities that like lessened hunger during the pandemic, like the Earned Incomes Tax Credit, you might have heard of or might have received pandemic EBT, right? Like if your kids were in school, but you weren't able to get the school meals, then the government decided to send everybody basically a debit card that reduced stigma, actually, because people could use it at farmers markets and anywhere where you purchase food. So between 2021 and 2022, about 20 to 25 million people throughout the country are food insecure. And in New York State specifically, right now, it's like about 2.1 million, and in New York City, just about 1 million food insecure residents. So that's like more than 10% of the state's population, and almost 15% of the city's population. So it is a really massive issue. That's like millions of households, thousands of children. And there's a lot of people who aren't even measured, right? Because there are flaws in the way we capture data, right? Like undocumented immigrants, which we have a lot of in the state, are not necessarily reflected as much as they could be. People who are homeless also may not be as measured. So I would say these numbers are still an undercount, even as high as they are. This is probably my favorite chart because we try to give you a sense of what our point of view is, which is that to end hunger and not just like put bandages on it, we really need to invest in higher wages and a stronger safety net. So I've mentioned SNAP and school meals and WIC, like that's what I mean when I say safety net, right? Like the government is the biggest entity with the money to solve hunger, right? Like that's why we all pay taxes. That's public funds that should be invested in public goods. And so to give you a sense, if we increase, if we increased food distribution by 20%, that would be like a 2 billion increase in addressing food insecurity, which sounds like a big number. But if you increase the safety net by 20%, that would be 33 billion, right? So that's like, I don't even know, more than like, I'm bad with math, but that's like 11 times, like 10 plus times, right? The amount of assistance. And then if you increase wages, that would be over 200 billion. So that's like 100 times more than increasing the food distribution. So this chart does a better job than I do at explaining that visually. But just to highlight this final number, right? Like this is where we want to get to, right? Raising wages just by $2 for the lowest income earners would really make a bigger dent than the safety net. Like nobody on the safety net wants to be on the safety net, right? Like these are emergency programs that people use in crisis, right? Like nobody wants to be on them forever. And what we found is that most people dip in and out of poverty throughout their lives based on a medical emergency, a family emergency, right? Like a random sudden, a climate disaster. These are really the reasons people fall into need. And then these programs help them get back up again. So these are the numbers, which are not my forte. I'm very transparent about that. But what is my forte is lived experience. And so this is a separate report that I helped with around getting people's like direct lived experience. And so we called it the life-changing power of increased food and cash aid, because that's how people felt, right? Like this is a direct quote from one of our interviewees, that if they got approved for $250 a month, they would literally cry because it would make such a difference in their life. So we conducted about 60 interviews in 12 states, directly related to people's experience with the programs I mentioned, like everything COVID related, right? Like the earned income tax credit, child tax credit, SNAP, WIC, pandemic EBT. And so we wanted to get their input on like, what did they think? Like, was it helpful? They just didn't need it. It was too much money. Like, what was their take? And so these are some of the big takeaways. You see this graph shows a spike in hunger when these programs ended January last year. And that level of hunger continues. So we want to make some of those things permanent. But basically, all of these programs had a high positive effect on people's lives. They were able to buy healthier food, right? Like a lot of poor people, they know what is healthier for them. They just can't afford it. So it's not a lack of education around like nutritious versus like junk food. It's really like, can I afford this or not? And then I think another factor there is that families with children that are in poverty, sometimes like if your child is looking at you asking for food and all you can do is like buy them a bag of chips, that is some power that parents have to like provide them with something rather than saying, no, go to bed hungry, right? A lot of the pandemic programs ending also forced people to go back into the food distribution system. So food pantries and soup kitchens really do a critical job in filling in the gaps, right? Like if I, let's say, submitted a SNAP application, but that's gonna take 30 days to process, right now I can go to my food pantry and get a meal for the day, for the week. So these programs need to work better in concert, and we want every food distribution program to do outreach and enrollment into these like longer term services. Like there's just a lack of education in that sense where people don't know that SNAP is still around and how to apply for it, navigating the interview, the applications, which documents you need. And then not only that, transportation was also a big problem for a lot of people. You know, living in New York City, it's easy to say, well, just take the subway, right? But even if you are taking the subway with like heavy bags of groceries in your hands, that's not effective, right? And then also, a lot of the poor people that we're talking about are elderly. So maybe there's disabilities that prevent them from making that trip. And then if you live upstate or in a more rural part of the country, state or country, there's a lot of, you know, farms and rural communities in upstate New York. If you don't have money for food, then you probably don't have money for gas, if you even have a car. And so that's why a lot of these programs need to be simplified. Like they need to be improved with the technology that we have available. Like the same way I move money from my bank account to my checking account by my phone. Like, why can't I do that with my benefits, right? And so just wanted to show more pictures from the historic White House Conference on Hunger that happened last fall. The last one happened back in the 60s under President Nixon. So it was nice to get President Biden with Congressman McGovern's leadership to fund and hold this conference where, you know, elected officials and, you know, service providers and community members came together to really talk about how to end hunger in the next few years, rather than like just saying, oh, what can we do? There's nothing we can do. But this is the end of my presentation because I don't want to bog down with too much data. Just wanted to give you all a sense of the work I do day to day at Hunger Free America. But now really want to turn to our panel and just have more of a discussion of what we can do collectively. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate your time. And to kick us started, I would love to just have each of you talk a little bit about how you got started in this food justice work. Starting with Jessica.
Great, thank you. And thank you for this report. I was looking through it earlier on my train ride here, and it's really great. And the data and the stories are really powerful. So during the height of the pandemic, again, I represent Western Queens that has been essentially the epicenter of the pandemic. And we saw how a community that has been always low resource and always struggling with food insecurity fall deeper into that struggle. So I volunteered quite a bit with a collective, like a mutual aid food pantry called Love Wins Food Pantry. It's actually a beautiful outcome of the pandemic in which queer and trans communities came together to feed the community. Many who they themselves needed food, but it really sustained quite a bit. And I spent a lot of time giving out food during the pandemic and talking to people on these lines, oftentimes wrapped around blocks in the community. So, you know, that was a really powerful experience, and they continue to distribute food every week. But as you said, Emilio, food pantries are really a Band-Aid under extreme emergency situations. And there's real solutions to be had. As someone who won my election and then got to choose or advocate for certain committees to be on, I was really advocated to be on the Social Services Committee, which I was successfully appointed to. So I was able to really bring these issues to light, talk about my experiences, talk about the solutions that we hear from experts like you all, as well as the experiences from people who are on these lines and telling their stories and bringing their spirits into the chamber, right? And fighting for policies that are going to improve their lives. So this is very much about addressing the safety net, but it's also very intersectional, right? Fighting for all the other things that impact our lives to make sure that the conditions of our community allow us all to thrive. But it's been really exciting to work alongside you in adjusting these policies. So I'm even more inspired to continue to advance policies that are going to work for our communities and address hunger in New York State.
And we're going to get a lot done this year. So I'm excited to continue this partnership. Joel, do you want to go next? How did you get into food justice?
Sure. I got into hunger sort of accidentally. And then when I did, I realized it was my life calling. So I worked on a lot of campaigns. I worked for a think tank in DC. My area of expertise was national service, which ended up becoming the AmeriCorps program. And then I worked on the campaign of a young Southern governor who was running for president, who was a ridiculous underdog, Bill Clinton. And I was sent to Kansas to be the state press secretary in that campaign. That's another long story I won't go into now. And then much to my shock, he won. And because I was in Kansas, I was sent to the Department of Agriculture. At the beginning of the Clinton administration as the press secretary and communications director for the entire Department of Agriculture. I had never been on a farm other than a zoo farm or a museum farm. And I was supposed to stay 120 days and then go to a department, frankly, I was qualified to be at. The Department of Education, Department of Labor, HUD, things where I had a serious policy background in. But as soon as I got there, I learned about all the things that USDA does. It does environmental work through the Forest Service. It does rural economic development, sort of the rural HUD. And then I learned about rural poverty, which just knocked my socks off. In 1993, there is still parts of the nation in the Mississippi Delta and Appalachia and in Mexican American areas along the border that didn't have running water. And then, USDA ran the domestic and international hunger programs, and I gravitated to that. I worked, convinced my bosses, one of whom is now on our board of directors, Dan Glickman, the former Secretary of Agriculture, former member of Congress, to allow myself to create a number of jobs, the AmeriCorps program, and then focusing on hunger. And then 21 years ago, I was a political appointee, and I lost my job when W became president. And I had two choices. I could have, significantly increased my salary by becoming a corporate lobbyist, or I could work for a nonprofit. I believe in government, but at the time, people were running New York State and New York City that I didn't believe in, so I didn't want to work for them. I'll leave it up to you to figure out who it was, but one of their names rhymes with Giuliani, another one rhymes with my Mackey, and I did not want to work for them. And so by default, I really want to work for the nonprofit sector, and I really understood that my calling was hunger because it combined, as an Assemblywoman said, everything I cared about. Women's justice. Households headed by single women are 3 times as likely to be food insecure as households overall. And we know that reproductive choice is directly tied to this. When more children are born that are not the choice of their parents, and particularly their mother, then there's going to be more hunger. And this is a civil rights issue because Latinx people and African Americans and indigenous people and Asian Americans are more likely to be food insecure than white, Americans. This is an LGBTQ justice issue because there's disproportionate hunger in those communities. So everything I cared about, that and the environment and economic justice, came together with this. And I'll just close by saying, there are a lot of people in hunger work who come from a legal services background, absolutely vital. A social work background, absolutely vital. Some come from the food industry, absolutely vital. But I first and foremost saw this as a communications and a political problem to be solved. And so my background was in communications and political communications and organizing and politics, as well as program management. And that's why I really gravitated this, because I think we needed more of a harder edge politics. So long story, how I got into this. It was sort of accidental because I ended up in Kansas, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And, I feel very, very, very fortunate that every day I wake up, I know what I'm supposed to do with my life.
I mean, that sense of purpose is something that we share. And so I'm excited to continue learning from you.
And for all you in social work out there, I know you don't make, unless you're a CEO of some well-funded organization, you're making squat. And I know assembly members make squat compared to what you can make in the private sector, more than any of your constituents, and I make a lot more than people represent. But what we share is most of us never have to worry whether our life has meaning or not. And many of our friends who may earn more do worry about that. So I wouldn't trade that for a second.
The life satisfaction is very high, for sure. Shanequa, do you want to share how your perspective on food justice and anything you've done in it?
Yeah, I guess I want to share a personal experience. And I think I've been doing this work my entire life, but sort of stepping back into how I got into it, I think it's my own lived experiences. So I am originally in the Bronx, which is we have some of the poorest districts in the Bronx, and we continue to be at the lowest in terms of health outcomes and food insecurity and so many things. And so growing up and living in the Bronx, I actually grew up in a single family household. So much of what Joe was talking about. My mother has 6 kids. I don't know how she did it, but she had 6 of us and we are all 1 year apart. And so she did her best to provide for us, but we were food insecure our entire lives growing up. And we utilized programs like WIC and SNAP and food pantries and food banks and those things to help us feed, be able to eat. We utilized summer meals and free lunch, and that's essentially how we ate. And so if it wasn't for these type of programs that, of course, we'll start talking more about in just a few moments, I probably would have starved, right? Because these were the programs that really helped to ensure that my siblings and I ate and that our basic needs were met. And so I want to start there because I think that's important. And that really is what led me to becoming a social worker, eventually working my first job under summer youth as an SYP worker, working in populations like very much like myself and my family, and then really loving, right, being able to give back and to make a difference in communities of color where poverty is structural and it's a real issue. And so I think I've been doing this work for a long time. When I say I've been doing it, I've been living it. I've lived it for from a very young age. I was born into, many people I've told my story. I was born into a shelter, and I was food insecure, born into food insecurity. So this is something that's very personal to me. And now I get to have thousands of kids in my role as a CEO to help them with these types of issues. This really is a structural issue, and there's a lot of connections between poverty and structural racism and other root causes of why we're facing food insecurity.
Thank you. And to your point, like lived experience is part of how I got into this as well. Myself, I am an immigrant. I came from the Dominican Republic when I was 10 years old. And as an undocumented immigrant, my family was not eligible for a lot of these programs. You know, my mother worked really hard. You know, we had a lot of family support that already lived in the city. And it was only through education that I was able to, you know, get a full-time job. I'm under the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So my status is still temporary. I still have to renew my immigration status every 2 years. And if I lost this job for whatever reason, like I would not be qualified for a lot of services. So part of what brings my passion is knowing those things and the communities that are still left out and advocating for solutions for everybody, because nobody deserves to go hungry. So I guess to go to Joel again, what's working? So like, what are the ways that you think we can end hunger in New York as a state?
Well, you know, we really need a national fix because we have, a national economy. And I'm concerned with the walls we're building against the rest of the world, but there are no walls between states now. And so if New York tripled its wages and doubled its safety net tomorrow, everyone would move from Connecticut and New Jersey. On the other hand, the current leadership of the House of Representatives, it's unclear, I will be as diplomatic as I can, it is unclear whether they will be able to govern in any way, shape, or form. So the whole so we're not going to get legislation out of Washington out in the next 2 years. We're going to be fighting to prevent horrid things from happening. And the Biden administration, most of the things it can do administratively, meaning without Congress, it's already done. And so that's why we're so dependent on the state, and we're so hopeful that we have a progressive majority in the legislature. The governor has proposed some progressive things. We want to push her to be more progressive on more fronts, but we know raising wages works. Like, in our annual study, we compared food insecurity in states based on their minimum wage rate. And what a friggin' shock. States that had higher wages had less hunger among working people. Now, wages have to go hand in hand with more affordable housing and childcare and transportation. And if everyone got a $2 an hour raise and then had to pay the equivalent of $3 more in rent, they're not going to be less hungry. And so I push progressives. It's not just a right-wing talking point to talk about inflation. It's something we all really need to deal with. But there's no question raising wages helps. And most people look at hunger in America and in New York as a food distribution problem, when it's not. It's a food affordability problem. You cannot ration your health care. You can't pay your doctor less or you don't get any more health care. You can't pay your landlord less or you're homeless. You can't pay the MTA less. If you try, you go to Rikers. You steal billions from real estate taxes, you may get a slap on the wrist, but you jump a turnstile, you go to Rikers. What you can do is buy less food. You can go without food yourself to feed your children. You can buy less healthy food that's cheaper, and that's why we have this problem, food affordability. So wages work, and the safety net works. when we increased the child tax credit, hunger went down. When people got, more SNAP, food stamps benefits, when they got the pandemic EBT benefits, when we expanded school meals, hunger went down. A top aide to then Mayor Bloomberg once asked me, could I prove that getting people food reduced hunger? And and I gave a very wonkish, detailed answer. And then my final answer is, frankly, only someone who would never worry about that their entire life could even imagine asking a question like that. You wouldn't ask someone, well, will bringing in water reduce drought? Yes. And so there's a lot of complicated nuances of this, and we overcomplicate, and so we sometimes have to deal with nuances. But the bottom line is, number one, get more money for people to buy food, and number two, get them the ability to get food on their own through SNAP or WIC or school meals.
I think, to your point, like, we criminalize poverty way too much, where like if a low income person does something wrong and then the hammer comes down, and someone who's like more affluent doesn't have the same repercussions. Jessica, do you want to talk a little bit about what you see as working in the state?
Yeah, I think, as Joel highlighted, some of the most progressive programs, the most successful programs is SNAP, right? Getting resources into the hands of people who need it, and being able to purchase the food that they need. And in fact, in New York, we have groups of folks who are eligible but have not signed up. I was able to secure over $1 million in our state budget last year that allowed for us to reach hard to reach communities, right? To invest in that, because not only do we have to invest in the program, we have to invest in the outreach for the program. And, again, with your partnership and leadership, we were able to get that done. As was mentioned, the pandemic EBT program is very successful. Unfortunately, it's going away. So I'll be introducing legislation to address this, because we know how successful that was. We saw, I think, in your charts, right, like where certain programs end and how you see the numbers go up of people who are food insecure. I think overall, and my background, as was mentioned, was in reproductive health and justice. And I did that work through a lens of expanding programs and eligibility and access for people who are always left out. And Emilio, as you shared, as someone who is undocumented and is now in DACA, and you still cut out of programs, right? And we have to make sure that anything that we do here in New York State, because while the federal government is out fighting and excluding folks, New York State can use our state dollars to cover folks who have been historically excluded. So one thing I really want to see, and I'm fighting for, is to expand eligibility to ensure that immigrant communities are included, that make sure that their status is not a barrier to accessing benefits, to being healthy and successful in New York. And also what was mentioned around universal school meals, like I have a bill that will continue the universal school meals, free breakfast, free lunch for every child, no matter their income, across the state. And that's going to help nearly 500,000 children who go hungry. So, these are programs, the universality of the programs are really critical. And the intersectional issues that we deal with every day. You mentioned raising the minimum wage. I was just at a rally today that advocating for a bill that would raise the minimum wage and then peg it to inflation. So as inflation increases, the minimum wage will continue to increase. I have a bill that would eliminate the sub-minimum wage, because believe it or not, we have our restaurant workers and other tipped workers who do not even make the minimum wage in New York. It's like a vestige of slavery to have the concept of a sub-minimum wage and a tipped salary to sort of make up for what they would lose. And we know so many people can't rely on the generosity of folks to, feed their children. So that's something that's been really important to me. And improving access to housing and employment and healthcare and educational opportunities, all that addresses hunger in New York. So those are the policies I'm either leading on or working alongside other advocates and leaders to be a champion, because everyone hears me say this, but I always go to this. There's no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we don't live single issue lives. And Audre Lorde said that. And when we look at issues like hunger, we have to address all the conditions that are part of a lived experience to ensure that everyone has food on their table and has a place that they can live, work, and thrive.
Can I just throw in as you know, the sub-minimum wage issue is also a gender justice issue. Women are disproportionately dependent on tips, and when they are, they're disproportionately subject to sexual harassment.
Absolutely, and in fact, it's often women of color as well. So it's both a racial justice and gender justice issue.
And we don't reward like work in the home, right? Like raising children is a lot of work, but that's not something, people get compensated for. And it generally tends to be women that stay behind or like work full time while also, taking care of the kids. Shanequa, do you want to speak a little bit about what you see working in your community?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love everything that Assemblymember Jessica and Joel stating. I think just, sort of echoing their sentiments, it's going to take a multidimensional approach because it is structural. And again, there are a lot of interconnections between food insecurity and poverty and housing, and so many other things that people of color, low-income people are dealing with. So some of the things that I have seen running this agency that mainly works in schools is that kids are coming to school hungry. And a lot of times they're expected to learn and they're expected to perform academically, but they are not able to because their basic needs are not being met. And sometimes, any one of us, I'm sure if you're hungry, you're not in the mood to probably work or to do your best, or you're probably not able to function and do your best. And so that's what a lot of our kids are facing and what we're seeing a lot of our kids go through. So I think there are a number of options, a number of things that we can do to really help children, specifically, especially kids that are in public schools. I think one of the things is CBOs that are in these schools and that are working not just in the schools, but in conjunction with the schools and these community organizations. They have access to these families. They work with these families on a day-to-day. They know the needs of these families. They connect with them, they engage with them. And so if we found ways to really fund CBOs more through federal, state, and city dollars, I believe that we can help to screen families for eligibility of services. Assemblymember talked about some families being eligible, but probably not knowing that they're eligible. So I think that there is a gap in terms of helping families to be screened for eligibility. And I think CBOs are some of the best methods or some of the best ways to really help families be screened. And not only to be screened, but to be able to make referrals for families to go and to follow up with them so that they do receive the services. And so I think that's one of the things we can do. School meals is great. And I think that is something that works. However, one of the things that we have noticed is that there's a lot of shame around eating free lunch or reduced lunch. A lot of kids sometimes waste it and don't eat it because it's not, how do I put this? It's probably not tasty enough, or it's not according to what their culture typically what the food would taste like. So I think giving kids options within those free meals is very essential to ensuring that kids actually eat the meals when they're provided, and so that we're addressing food insecurity within schools. And another thing I would suggest is we talked about higher wages, which I 100% agree with. Now, as a small business owner of a CBO that relies on funding from city, state, and federal funds, I think it's also essential to make sure when we're passing these bills that they're comprehensive enough to also support nonprofits and CBOs that have to make these changes, because we're the ones that have to ensure it's in our budget to be able to pay higher wages. So, looking at things from a comprehensive standpoint, when we're looking at higher wages, we must also look at ways to fund nonprofits and CBOs better to be able to pay higher wages for their staff, and especially for social workers. Two other things I would say that's working that I would love to see more of is childcare. And there's a lot of childcare deserts throughout New York City, throughout New York State, really. And I know there was some work on the state level in terms of child desert grants that went out, but there's still not enough. We have a lot of desert areas where there's not enough childcare. And when there's not childcare, parents can't go to work. And if they can't go to work, how are they making money? If they can't make money, then they're food insecure. They can't pay for food to eat, to be able to, feed their children. And so childcare is really important, ensuring that we are investing in childcare and after school programs. My organization runs a number of after school programs, and I can tell you that parents rely on these programs to be able to go to work. And to be able to work a full day, because kids get out of school at 3 o'clock. Most parents work until 5 p.m. So if they don't have after school, where are the kids going to go, once school is over? And so investing in after school programs and childcare programs are also very essential. And the last two programs I would say that I was a recipient of, and that many of my the kids in my organization utilize, as well as SYEP. So expanding that, and I would love to see that all year long, because it's a great economic benefit for kids in the summer, and it's a great way to add in more financial income into households. However, it stops at the end of the summer, right? And these kids rely on that sometimes to eat and get their school supplies and so forth. So strengthening and expanding those programs, making them year-round or wraparound, will really help to address this issue. And then lastly, CUNY, investing in increased education opportunities. You talked about it, Emilio, that being the thing that helps you, echoing your sentiments. Education was the thing that lifted me out of poverty. And so I think when we invest in, we eliminate barriers to education, to our higher education opportunities, we help to create more long-term sustainable solutions to address this.
Yeah, and I want to touch on a lot of what you just shared, because SYEP, like the Summer Youth Employment Program, was a way, and like other internships, was a way that I actually started my work and like made money, right? Like I was like, my mom's not going to have money to give me for Metro cards or for meals after school, exactly. So I just found all these like, hodgepodge of programs that I myself as a student, right? Like 16, 17 years old, like myself looking for different things that I could engage, that my mom was like, didn't have time to like look into. And I think your point around childcare is well taken, because, right, like increasing wages only helps if you can work, right? Like if the person cannot work because they're in a shelter or they have children, that those increased wages can't go as far.
Absolutely.
Can I just highlight Paula's comments talking about school meals?
Yeah, I did want to do that too. Go ahead.
That, as a school guidance counselor, 8 in 10 of the young people referred to her for, activity in infractions, said they didn't eat in the morning. And I point out, I grew up in Rockland County, and solidly, middle class backgrounds in a school that was mostly middle class. We had some low income people, but I got a free jersey to play mediocre JV, soccer, where I spent a lot more time on the bench than I ever did on the field. I got free lab equipment, free textbooks, free ride to school on the school bus. And why that's free, and we nickel and dime kids, over whether their parents are poor or sort of poor or not quite poor. It's not like the Bloombergs and the Bezoses are sending their kids to public schools. This idea, if you make meals universal, lots of rich kids are going to get them. It's just, preposterous. And you've heard this a zillion times, Emilio, but, my line is, to be schooled, you must be fueled. To be well-read, you must be well-fed. And when they can't be universal, we've got to make it easier for people to apply for multiple benefits. We proposed, and we're glad that, Mayor Adams took up this idea of making it easier to apply for multiple benefits. It's a very complex issue, and we're hoping the state can do more on that. The governor said she's going to do a little more for programs for children. The rest of the state is taking years to implement this, when in fact, when they wanted to get a vaccine outreach portal up, they did it in a few weeks. So this idea you have to take years to do this is hogwash. It's just they don't see the political narrative to help low-income people get this help. And we really need a combined state and city effort, because WIC is run by the state, SNAP in New York City is run by the city, and I bet the New York City portal is not going to have WIC because it's not a city program. And that's something we're hoping the legislature can do more on as well, get them a little pilot funding and a little pressure to say, make this as important as getting people vaccines. 10 years ago, they automated more automated motor vehicles in New York to get your license. And because there's a lot of political pressure from the upper middle class, mostly white people, who were more likely to own vehicles. And we need that political pressure to get this done for low income people.
Right. Can I just respond real quickly to Joel, piggyback off him? And I love Paula's comment, really. She mentioned that she asks as a question, have you eaten today? And I think that's another thing that we need to do is screen for food insecurity, have that as a part of our, as social workers, whether we're working in schools or clinics or hospitals, we need to be screening for that, and not just screening, but connecting families to the right resources. And then also Joel talked about like the benefits, they really need to be streamlined. And that's another barrier to accessing these types of resources. Families may not be able to access it because sometimes it's impossible to do so. So we have to work on accessibility, streamlining.
Well, going to 4 different offices to get 4 different things rather than just sending one application and getting all the things you're eligible for, that's really the world we want to move towards. Jessica, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add a little more on the universal school meals.
Mhm.
You know, in the assembly, when we have budget ideas, right, we submit them, we wait for a number, and you know, and while we're doing that, my team and I were talking to our colleagues and sharing our vision around the bill. Once we got our number, we have over 40 people on the bill. We have at least 6 Republicans on the bill. This is a universally supportive program. How many do we have? I'm getting a 7. I'm getting fingers. We have 7 Republicans on, and you know, you don't see a lot of bipartisan stuff happening in New York State, to be honest. So it's really exciting to see how universally supported the idea of healthy meals for all school children are. It is widely popular. We had a rally like the second week of session. It was so well attended, lots of media coverage, people from all around the state. In fact, places like Long Island would benefit greatly if we're able to ensure all the children are able to get breakfast and lunch for free. So this is just such an important thing. And I think to like the quotes that you use, I heard, you know, you can't teach a hungry child. And I think Paula's comments about asking children, have they eaten? And many have not. It impacts their behavior. It impacts their performance. It impacts their academic success. This is such a simple solution. And it doesn't actually cost that much in the grand scheme of, I think it's about 0.1% of the state budget if we're able to get it through.
Well, it would save us more money, right? Like it would save us if we were just feeding the children so that they weren't acting out and they had higher grades and they didn't need to repeat school. We would be saving a lot of money in what we spend on education and criminalizing, right? Like the police and jails and stuff, like health outcomes, right? Like we would save a lot of money in healthcare. And you mentioned 47? Like out of 150, right? So you're almost at like a third of the entire, assembly supporting that proposal.
Yeah, and this is just in days of getting the bill number. So this is, we haven't even done all the outreach yet. So it's just really telling how popular this is and how it's needed across the state.
No, yeah, and I wanted to just mention also something else Shanequa touched on, and also, Paula's comment brings to bear, which is that we need to co-locate these services, right? Like school is already a place where all these children are. Like, why aren't we doing a better job of promoting SNAP outreach or like WIC or like summer meals, right? Like, I don't think there's enough like cohesion between like these like public services that we already provide, or like community-based organizations who are trusted messengers that people go to, because, I know from my time as a caseworker, people don't want to go to the government agency. Like, oftentimes that experience isn't positive, right? Like, I think that's the role social workers play, is that we do have these emotional skills to deal with people with trauma, so we can help people navigate these issues a little bit easier than the government, right? Like, those workers may not be trained as social workers. And oftentimes, like, what I would hear from clients was, well, I just told you my whole story and all of my problems. Like, why do I have to go meet a new person and tell them my story all over again? So I think the way to fix that emotional labor too is to simplify the way that people can apply. Like, if you apply for childcare, just get, I got food assistance too, great. Like, I'm eligible for both, and I didn't have to spend time and energy going to different offices to get it. Like, often that's another barrier. It's like, I don't have time to apply for multiple things, so I'm just going to go for the childcare because I don't have time to deal with the food assistance, or vice versa. Also, there's improvements in the safety net that we want to see. Like, we're pushing for the hot meals to be included in SNAP, because right now, if you get SNAP, you can only buy groceries to cook. And if you're in a shelter, you know, as Shanequa was talking about, that if you're in a shelter, sometimes they don't have adequate cooking facilities. So buying groceries may not be as helpful as like, let me just buy a sandwich that's going to save me time and also like be easier to consume.
So I'll just say,
yeah, please.
hot meals are coming in New York under SNAP, assuming USDA approves it, for people with disabilities, homeless people, and seniors in limited ways. I didn't mean to interrupt, but
yeah, no, I was that's what I was speaking to. So we're pushing for that right now. It's called the Restaurant Meals Program, and the governor is supportive of that. So just letting everybody know that that is coming. And I wanted to, yeah, go ahead.
Can I just build about your comments about the role of social workers? And thank you guys all so much for your work. So my mother was a social worker. And as you know, you guys have been forced to micromanage the lives of poor people since there was social work. In the 1940s, she had a client family who, I don't know how many kids the woman had, you know, but it was like a fifth floor walk up. And my mother was instructed by her bosses, I think she may have ignored them, to tell the woman she had to get rid of the washing machine because it was a luxury that someone getting assistance shouldn't deserve. And so, you know, what we want to do is allow low-income people to be their own caseworkers, to free you guys up to do other work. So that should be, you know, applying for benefits online. But I also think the really cutting edge of poverty policy is helping people develop assets, own stuff to move out of poverty. You know, I don't want to be, you know, political, but let's just say progressives are partially only doing okay because the opposition is so awful. I mean, progressives cannot win statewide in Ohio and Florida and Texas, big states. You know, progressives have started losing some of the Hispanic vote, perhaps, and some of the Asian American, you know, vote. And part of the reason I think that is many people do not see progressives as aspirational. They're just redistributive, which is important. We support more benefits rather than less, but I think progressives have to be for helping people get ahead. And I think that's the right thing to do politically, but also substantively. Low-income people, we all know their vision board of a better life isn't bigger, better SNAP 20 years down the road. It's economic independence. So that's the other part of our proposal for the whole proposal, not only to allow people to apply online and then tie that to banking services so they don't have to pay these ridiculous fees to these check cashing rip-off places, but also develop a plan with nonprofits and the government to put money on a down payment on a first home, to start a new business, to save for retirement. The biggest difference between poor people and hungry people and non-poor and hungry people is low-income people owe stuff, owe interest, and wealthy people own stuff and earn interest. And we really need to change that in the long run. I think it's the right thing to do both politically and substantively.
Absolutely. And I want to move into Jessica or Shanequa, do you want to say a little bit more about like the role you see for social workers in this fight?
Well, I kind of wanted to, I think what Joel was saying was really thoughtful in a sense that we don't invest enough into these more long-term services. And I think we're always trying to put bandages on top of problems that are temporary fixes, but they're not long-term. So I do agree with the ownership and pushing more home ownership programs and communities. There's a lot to that, but I think a long-term way, and I think social workers are influential in that, but helping to empower families. I think our role is screening for it, which we already seen Paula mention in the chat box, but we have we know our clients, like we know them, right? We are working with them all the time. We have their trust and they're confiding in us. And so I think being able to screen for that, but once we screen for it, being able to connect them with resources. But then the other part is advocacy, which I think, you know, we don't, we need to do more of as social workers. We hold a lot of power in these places. I know when I used to be a social worker at Children's Aid many years ago, I always advocated for my clients. I was consistently advocating for changes programmatically to happen so that my clients had the food and childcare and other services that they needed. So I think advocacy is also a big piece, and then empowerment, because essentially we want families to be self-sufficient. We want them to be independent. We want them to move away from these sort of short-term fixes to something more long-term and permanent. And I think we play such a vital role in that. And so empowering our clients and helping to connect them to the resources that they need. And it's customized family by family, but there's a comprehensive approach that we really need to be employing.
Thank you. We're getting a lot of questions in the chat, which I love to see, but Jessica, if you want to go first.
Just the one thing I'll add is that I feel like social workers make the best organizers. Social workers make the best advocates. They make the best activists because, again, as others have said, they're working most closely with impacted communities. And I actually believe impacted communities hold the solutions to the problems that they're facing. And social workers are excellent conduits of those messages and of those stories and of those solutions. So it's so funny, until I had a social worker as my chief of staff, I sort of didn't realize how many social workers were in my life and how I surrounded myself by sort of that energy. Because as an activist and as an organizer and as an advocate, you meet people where they're at. You often create solutions together, and you advocate for a better world. And I think that's really, really important. And in that spirit, we'll be dropping links to advocate to get your assembly members and senators on our bills so we can, get this done in this session. But I just wanted to really say that because I think there's such a spirit of advocacy and compassion and solutions-driven vision that social workers hold through their work on the ground with communities who are most impacted.
Thank you. And I definitely agree. I'm definitely proof of that. I'm the policy director at a nonprofit. And I think part of what helps me is that our social work skills also make us really good at diplomacy. So hearing multiple points of view and being able to come, meet people where they're at and provide information in a non-threatening way, I think are all strengths for us. I see a few questions in the chat, but Monique, I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to speak up? You have a question?
Yes, more like a statement. Thank you very much for the event. I'm learning so much and appreciate the content. And which brings me to my second comment, because as a social work student, most of our internships are really focused on micro, trying to help the client deal with the problems the community or the system set up for them, right? So we, for me, I would like to see more macro institutions say, hey, we want social work interns, especially for our social work, our social workers who are licensed, to say to colleges, send us some of your social work interns so that they can understand policy and understand what we're doing on the macro level. I was wondering if anyone had talked about that. Even in the policy, in the government, we really need advocacy as social work students to bring us in.
Can I take that one, Emilio?
Absolutely, go for it.
So policy is my passion, Monique. I studied policy at Columbia, and it's my love. So I am huge, and that's I was actually going to mention is, and social workers, more social workers being in policy and in government. I think it starts with our institutions. Our institutions need to be the curriculum, the content, what we're teaching students need to reflect social workers being able to go into avenues of government and policy. So I think a lot of work needs to be done on a school level and with schools of social work. But then also, like what you mentioned, expanding internship opportunities so it is policy focused. I know that when I did my internship many years ago in policy, it wasn't policy focused, and I had to advocate for something that was more policy appropriate so I can get the field experience I felt like I needed before graduating. And so I think, field experience is a huge barrier and a huge issue in schools of social work. And so, yes, schools of social work need to do a better job, perhaps having some forums, talking to your field advisors and deans of social work and seeing how could we really expand and strengthen policy programs. And I think another part of that is electives. I'm working with NYU right now to maybe build a social work policy elective course in the MSW program, because we need more of them. That we don't have enough, our curriculum doesn't really support it. So how are we really preparing social workers and policy and government if our curriculum is not reflecting that? So I think that's really important. And then raising awareness of what social work looks like, that it's not just micro. We are many, right? We operate on different levels. There's macro, there's meso, there's business. We can go into so many fields, so many industries within social work. And then people like Assemblymember that is bringing in social workers as chief of staff, I think is also very important. So Monique, thanks for raising that.
Yeah, and I would
Just
say
one
that
quick historical point, two of the most influential social policy makers in American history in FDR's New Deal were social workers, Harry Hopkins and the great Frances Perkins, the first female cabinet secretary, and their social work backgrounds played a key role in formulating the New Deal, the best parts of the New Deal.
And I would say that's part of what the social work students can do now to advocate for this change. Like, I think a lot of part of the issue with social work education too is that some schools make students pick a major or like a concentration like way too early. And if I had done that, I went to Lehman, which has a generalist program. And so I got a little bit of everything. But if I had to pick a major, I would have picked clinical, because I went into it being like, I'm going to be a therapist and I'm going to have a private practice and that's it. And then as I saw my colleagues just sort of like gravitating towards that, and nobody wanted the policy work, I was like, maybe there's a gap there that I can fill. Jane, I see your hand up. Do you have a question as well?
Wait, Emilio, before you jump in, I just want to say one thing. The one thing I tell my colleagues in the state assembly is to hire social workers. And we work with the Silverman School, and every year we get about 2 social workers who are in the community organizing program. And that's been really, really wonderful. And I think they've all turned out so far have been really great. And that's been something I've talked to other members about, because staffing is always difficult. You know, it's, as Joel said, you know, no one's making a lot of money in this work, but there's a lot of passion, a lot of heart, and the ability to make tremendous change in New York.
And I think this could be something NASW-NYC can help in the state, like just helping to connect different elected official offices with interns. I think you're giving me an idea about that. We'll talk. Jane, did you want to?
Back to not only social work interns, but the discussion of the importance of CBOs. I mean, I'm co-chair of subcommittee on children in migration of the NGO Committee on Migration. So we're always looking at the situation of people in migration, families and children, and even the smallest children in New York City who they're invisible. I mean, 0 to 3. Okay. And we have 4 social work interns, 3 from Fordham and 1 from NYU, working with us, part of our team. And right now we're working on a team addressing CBOs. We're looking for CBOs in New York City who work with migrants and who work with families with the youngest children, because we want to capture their experiences, their lived experiences. How is it for them? What kind of services are there? Where are the gaps? How can we pull this, if we can pull the CBOs and pull them together to make their needs known, that would be a big thing. And this is the interns are working on a letter right now to reach out to some of the CBOs that some of them actually, we discovered there was the meeting on a city council hearing on early childhood development. And the CBOs were there and they were saying, we're closing, we have to close. We don't have funding. And the services for these young families is critical. And there's also information, there's a huge data gap. We don't know who the children are, where they're from. They're not counted, the undocumented, but not only the kids in shelters or homeless children. There's just a huge gap. And all of this has to coalesce, bring it together and and embrace families with a lot of support. And as you said, create programs, but expand the programs that are there, strengthen them.
Mhm. No, thank
Okay,
you.
so I really believe that there's social workers are really front and center in all different aspects of this. Yes, thank you.
And just to share a little bit, Governor Hochul, one of the good things that she has done so far is she appointed the Child Poverty Reduction Council. It's like a new body that is looking at specifically what you're talking about, right? Like there are children in need all throughout the state, and we're advocating for them to take a serious look at what are other programs that can be strengthened and expanded. Anybody else want to talk about like child hunger and how we address that? I think universal school meals, healthy school meals for all is a clear way to do that as well.
I would just say that universal school meals are absolutely vital. I've been advocating for that just for a few decades. I'm glad that Assemblywoman's there now, picking up the leadership mantle on it. But let's not think we can end child hunger without aiding parents. And there are some groups that sometimes give the just get the kids' school meals and we're done. Well, schools are in session 180 days out of the year. And so if you get every kid a school lunch and a school breakfast, and New York City, by the way, is really lagging in school breakfast administration. Adams administration said they want to fix that, but we still have the worst school breakfast participation of any major city in the United States. But even if you get every kid a school breakfast and school lunch, 180 times 2 is 360 meals, out of a year. When if you eat 3 meals a day, it's over 1,000 meals a day. And so there's no way around of reducing hunger for parents and aiding families. Some people push to have these backpack programs where you give kids food to take home over the weekend. I think that's really disempowering for parents. This idea that it's one thing when the kids are away from home to be fed, but it's another thing that the kids become the provider. I understand how you want to end hunger, but I think that's a mistaken, strategy. Someone asked a question about child labor, and I'd be curious if people have examples of it. I know two things. Number one, 100 years ago, it was totally legal in New York, and there was a big fight to change it. And in fact, some religious group and Francis Perkins worked for then Governor Al Smith to try to get rid of it, and finally did make it mostly illegal in New York. So I know it's, there's some child labor that still exists legally and mostly illegally in agriculture. And I know there are a fair amount of kids who work in their families' businesses, but is there widespread still child labor in New York otherwise?
That I don't know. That's what I'm asking about. We are preparing a side event for the Commission on Social Development on February 10th on child labor, but this is internationally. But it's right under our noses. It's right under our noses. It's the mother who's holding a child and begging. These people, if they don't have money, they're going to find a way to get money. And if children are feeling responsible for their parents or for their siblings, they're going to be out there. They're going to skip school.
Well, I think I think your question was also,
or worse.
Well, I think your question was about like how do we have any data? And I think that's one of the gaps in data. I can just share my personal experience. Like as a high schooler, I definitely helped my mom like make food, and I would sell the food at school. Like I would take like a little like freezer full of like pastelitos and just sell them to my teachers and my classmates. So I think there is a lot of like underground like child labor that we just don't see. And when you mentioned the idea of like, the parents using their children to panhandle and things like that, like I've certainly used that, like, right, like we've all seen the children on the train, like selling candy. But I don't know that there is like a systemic measurement of how often that happens. I know that
but they have to be reported. Social workers need to step in. They need to see this. We need a new social contract. It's just unacceptable because those children are not going to go to school, and then it's intergenerational.
I just want to point out that
yeah, go ahead.
if it does exist, it is a small fraction of the problem 100 years ago. I don't know if you ever heard the term breaker boys. they were little boys sent to the front of anthracite coal mines to break up the coal by hand, specifically because their fingers were so small they could get in the cracks. So I'm not saying the child labor we have now is acceptable, but most of it is illegal and an underground economy. And so that we both need to do more, but also mark that this is a good example of a social problem that government intervention dramatically reduced.
Well, I think this is a good topic because I think there's probably a breadth of opinions about it. And I would just say that I know that children in foster care don't fare any better than, people that, like the child, like, for example, like if I had been taken away from my mom because I was working, right? I would be worse off, not better off. And so I think there needs to be, as you say, like a clear or like a new updated way that we, handle these issues. But Shanequa or Jessica, any thoughts on that?
Right. Yeah, the one thing I did want to let you all know is that in the agricultural sector, children 12 and older can work. And I'm just looking at the regulations to confirm minors 12 years of age or older may be employed in the hand harvest of berries, fruits, and vegetables in New York. I have a bill that would raise that age to 16 and look at some of the conditions, right, that they can't operate heavy machinery, or they need breaks, and they can't operate in heat conditions and in extreme weather conditions. So it's going to be a tough one. There's some exceptions for like family farms where the family members can have their children work, but those are issues we need to address. So that's legally happening in New York, 12 and older.
Yeah. I just want to, I think definitely what the Assemblymember is saying, it is, I think we got to be when we're approaching things like this, culturally humble. And so in certain cultures, yes, sometimes kids are working, and I like to look at it more as entrepreneurship. And of course, if it's not taking away from them being in school, it's a part of their culture. And we have, I support, if I'm walking down a block and I see a young girl, boy selling with their parents on a weekend or after school, I'm going to buy hearables or whatever they're selling. It may not be on a farm, but it may be other things. And I think that we need to be very careful of how we talk about that. Obviously, I'm not talking about forced child labor, but if it's in the family, it's a family business, and it's a part of the way that the family makes money, I think we need to just be very culturally humble when we're approaching that. But on the other hand, I wanted to mention that another program that I think is really helpful that I've seen in my organization is entrepreneurship. And one of my students actually just secured a $10,000 contract with the DOE, where now she's and all that money goes to her, where she's able to now provide services to the DOE as a contractor. So one of the services we provide is helping kids become entrepreneurs. And I think that's a really great way of also solving this issue, because kids, they're creative and a lot of them are natural entrepreneurs. And so sort of building on those skills and creating opportunities for them to leverage that and to learn what entrepreneurship is, it really does support their academics. All of our kids that graduated from the entrepreneurship program, 100% of them graduated high school and they're all in college running their own companies. And they are, yes. And so entrepreneur programs, they work. We got to invest in those as well.
Can you just address the food safety donation question?
Can you just repeat the question before you answer it?
The question was basically, are schools allowed to donate extra food? And my answer is a definitive depends. If the food was already served, they cannot donate it, nor should they donate it. And restaurants can't donate it, caterers can, if it's already put out there and served. But if it's not served, if there's a tray of lasagna that's never brought out, wherever, they absolutely can donate it. Many people within DOE falsely claim it violates the health laws, falsely claim it violates USDA directives. I worked at USDA for 8 years. I helped issue a memorandum to school districts that it is not USDA requirement, but you throw out the food. And so you can reach me at jberg@hungerfreeamerica.org and I can bring it up with DOE if I need to, if there's food that is unserved that they're throwing out. Aside from the hunger waste, the environmental waste, that's a whole nother issue. The top part of our solid waste stream in New York is food waste. Reducing it won't dramatically reduce hunger in America, but certainly help the environment. We're shipping our food waste a few states away, and the carbon footprint of that is insane. And by the way, DOE serves more meals a day than any entity in America other than the Pentagon.
And I would add to that too, that sometimes people go to food rescue as a way to end hunger. And I would highlight what you just said, that it would help the environment. It would be like a climate justice thing, but it's not dignified, right? If I'm a person, and even if I'm in need, I don't want someone else's leftovers. So I think that's another aspect of that. And then related to this, we got another question around plant-based vegan diet. Are there programs that are encouraging those kinds of diets? I would say there are. Someone else, I think Emily in the chat also said, highlighted some of the programs. I would point to Grow NYC. There's Health Bucks, which incentivize SNAP recipients to buy, it increases their amount of benefits based on whether they buy at farmers markets or other programs. Are there other sort of healthy food programs that you all would highlight?
Well, first of all, I'd highlight SNAP and WIC. That SNAP, you can use at farmers markets. You can use for an entirely vegan, vegetarian, diet. You cannot do that usually if you have to rely on, food pantry or food bank food as good a job as they do. They're not able to often make that an entire option. There's produce benefits in WIC, and certainly Mayor Adams has accelerated providing vegan and plant-based options in New York City public schools. And we would encourage that. We would encourage the choice of parents, to be able to make that, decisions. Some may find that, there are meat or dairy provides the protein they want for their children. And there is some misinformation out there among some activists, claiming, milk causes cancer and those other things. So I think providing the options for adults and parents to make their own choices and making, healthier food and a vegan and plant-based diet economically viable is certainly the best way to go.
And I totally agree with you. And I appreciate everybody for staying with us. I think we have another question from Paula. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I can't put I really am not very smart with my computer today. I don't know how to raise my hand or put my camera on. I'm always on my phone with the Zoom, but just the weird things that are occurring in schools, so we all bring our own snacks to feed the kids because we can just tell, we're all mothers anyway there. So we get it. We're like, uh-oh, you look hungry. And even if it's not an infraction, it's, sadness or not being able to concentrate, was mentioned before. So we had one of our staff members go downstairs in the morning and just kind of grab some fruits and some whatever it is that we could, and we had it just kind of available there. And then that became an issue. It was like, oh, this has to be attached to an OSIS number. And I'm like, well, I'm not really very psychic, and it's not really the best thing to do is to interrupt someone who's not really well at the moment to be like, let me get your OSIS number. It's just bad practice, so it became an issue because it had to be attached to an OSIS number. I'm like, it doesn't make sense, there's so much food here. How are we throwing this away? So the food that I was thinking of donating was certainly not the ones that were served or anything like that. But from what I'm hearing, it's unopened things. It's, why aren't they, my dream ideally, and I know it's not cleanly, I guess, but to have, little mini food stations in very central areas like the guidance department, the dean's office, where they don't have to go downstairs to the cafeteria because they're stopped. Well, you're not supposed to be here. And, not everybody's looking at it with a guidance counselor or a social worker lens. This kid is hungry. Please let them go downstairs and get something real quick. And so
some schools do have what we call grab and go meals and snacks in the hallway. And we certainly, promote more of that.
And I think to your point about donation, I have a slide that I'll put up at the end with my contact information and several ways for you to get in touch with us, because we'd love to connect you with a CBO, a community-based organization near your school that could, potentially take donations at the end of the school day or something like that. I think we encourage all of those types of partnerships. I don't know. Are there any other questions from the audience? I think this has been some really good questions that I'm still going to keep thinking about after this panel.
Assemblywoman, are you still really in an Amtrak waiting room? If you do, you get
I
all the
am.
props. Shanequa, you
I
look like
am.
you're in your office or home. Emilio looks like he's home. I'm in
Yeah.
a comfortable room, but Amtrak radio,
Champion.
that's hardcore. So thank you so much. Is that the Albany
I'm just-
Rensselaer station?
I'm just coming back from Albany, yeah. So
Used to be
yeah, we
named after
are.
Joe Bruno, and now isn't.
No, thank you for being with us. This is dedication at its finest. And we don't have to go all the way till 8 p.m., but I just wanted to schedule enough time for us to have a discussion. I think we've touched on a lot of the questions I had prepared, and I think this is a good time to, if there's any closing statements that you all want to make before we go. Jessica?
Yeah, I actually, the one thing I just didn't get to mention that is important for you all to know is there's a skimming happening with SNAP benefits, meaning that the cards are not secure, and there are devices being placed on some of these machines, and people are literally, coming and grocery shopping and putting their food on the conveyor belt, and then the worker at the supermarket is saying you have no money on your card, and families are saying, no, I had $300, I had $500, I had $900, I was saving that for this Thanksgiving meal. I was like, and there's nothing, and when you look back in the record, there's money was stolen from California. Like, there's real evidence of this happening, and it's so tragic, and we're hearing family after family after family has been impacted. So we're looking at addressing actually a number of solutions to this problem. There's a federal issue there about reimbursing back these stolen funds. We're working with Senator Gillibrand on that. We're introducing legislation in New York. It's also, that's something else that people feel a lot of compassion towards, and understanding that these are these benefits that people really rely on for their health and well-being and for that of their family. And when it's stolen from them, they literally cannot put food on the table. So I just want to flag that for you all as an issue that to keep your eye on. We're looking at it through legislative solutions, but we certainly will need the advocates to continue to elevate that drumbeat, because I'm sure many of you as social workers doing this work have maybe have clients, and it's frustrating that the answer is like, we just can't do anything because that's not acceptable. This is the moral responsibility of the state and the country to take care of. So we're working on it. Nothing's done yet, but it's looking promising.
And that, I'll just emphasize what you're saying. So like, we've all known of like phishing scams and fraud and things like that. This skimming issue is a new issue that has come to light. It's specifically around SNAP, right? Like, this is like heinous people out there like stealing money from people who are already poor. And so just everybody watching, please let people know to watch out for scammers. The social service agency is never going to ask them for their PIN via text or email. Like, those are scams. So please contact your state legislatures to support. We just had a petition dropped in the chat. We also ask you to let the governor know how you feel about school meals for all. And Shanequa, do you have any last comments you want to make?
I'm probably just reiterating, borrowing from Paula earlier, is screen for food insecurity with your clients. If you're working with families directly, ask your students or your clients whether they've eaten. And if they haven't, I'm not sure what the school, climate looks like for each school, but try to get them food, try to get their basic needs met. And if you're working with families, and you have the ability to refer them to services within your role, refer them, but do the follow-up, which is what I tell my staff all the time. Don't just give them a number and tell them to call it. Walk them through it and really support them so that they can get connected to the right help and support.
Thank
Let
you.
me just
Joel? Yeah.
add big props to Senator Gillibrand. She was able to actually get in the year-end budget bill a federal fix for the skimming, and now we just need that matched by the state. She was also played a key role in making summer EBT benefits for families with kids permanent. And that's very important, because that does cover families who are undocumented if they have kids in public school. Unfortunately, conservatives in Congress made sure to pay for that by cutting SNAP benefits. So at the end of February, you're going to see a sharp reduction in SNAP benefits. And I note that same bill had $100 million for cotton merchandisers, not even cotton farmers, cotton merchandisers, middlemen who buy cotton from farmers and sell it to mills got $100 million because they said they had a hard time in the pandemic. I thought all these right-wingers thought the free market, government shouldn't interfere with businesses. Let me just close with this. I've been fortunate to travel around the world, and there are, a fair amount of places with significantly more hunger than the United States, mostly developing countries. But keep in mind, there are a whole bunch of countries on the planet that essentially don't have hunger. It just doesn't exist in Scandinavia. Even big diverse countries like France and Germany and Belgium just do not have the levels of hunger we have. Nothing close to the levels of hunger and poverty we have. And it's not because their weather is different or their population's different. They've made a choice. They've made a choice that if you're working, you're paid enough to feed your family. They've made a choice that if you're not earning enough, there's a safety net to protect people, and the child care is heavily subsidized. The only thing that's ever really worked in solving social problems in America is a social movement pressuring government to do the right thing. We have made, as I said, there's horrible things in agricultural labor, and we need to change that, but we have dramatically reduced child labor. We have gotten women the right to vote, although be nice women paid equally and can get to control their bodies again. That would be nice. We have marriage equity, although that could be on the shopping block as well. But all those happen because of the social movement. And we need a social movement to demand that America enter the rest of the civilized world and make sure all our citizens can feed their families. Yes, it'd be good if you're a progressive and agree with us, but if you're a conservative, no government in the history of the world has remained a superpower if it's failed to feed its own children. Our military can't be strong, our economy won't be strong. So whether you care about it for moral reasons, whether you care about it for pure self-interest, let's work together to build the social movement to finally end hunger in America. That's my closing rant.
Thank you. And this is the passion that I'm inspired by. I want to make a technical point on what you mentioned about emergency allotments ending, and then I'll make my closing statement, and then I'll do some announcements. So anyway, just a very practical thing for everybody to know. What Joel was talking about is, some people were getting basically double benefits during the pandemic, and those extra benefits are about to end. The last double payment people are going to get is in February. So starting in March, people will see sort of like their benefits were cut, but in reality, they're just going back to normal levels. And so that's something we are letting everybody know. The state agency is going to send out many texts and flyers about that. But people are going to be confused. They're going to say, like, my benefits were cut. And so this technical of like, it's just extra benefits, like nobody's going to care, right? All they're going to know is we have less money. So we just want to prepare communities as much as possible about that. My closing point is about like the design of these programs, right? Like many of these programs are old, like they were established decades ago under a different cultural, historical context. And so for me, as I do my policy advocacy, I try to center the most marginalized community, which to me is Black trans women. They're they're persecuted because of their trans identity, because of their gender identity as women, and because of their race. And so I feel like if we develop solutions that help them, it'll lift all boats. And so that's the guiding principle that I live by. The other point I wanted to make was about continuing education. Someone asked about this at the beginning of the session. I said class almost. But basically this session does not provide continuing education credits, but we do have an accompanying workshop in February 15th. I just put the link in the chat for anybody interested in registering. Welcome you to continue exploring this issue and learning more about SNAP and WIC services. And that is the end of the presentation. So I think I'm going to send the slides that I put together as a PDF as follow-up, as well as the reports that I shared. Pia, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to introduce myself because you mentioned the continuing education credits. So I'm Pia Hargrove. I'm a licensed social worker. I teach at NYU as well. So I definitely agree with Shanequa and the entire panel. Amazing tonight, and speaking to addressing poverty as a whole and how we end hunger. And shout out to the entrepreneurs and pastelitos y todo, because I grew up in a family business and I was working from the time that I stood on a milk crate, and I'm 6 feet tall now, and I had to still stand on the milk crate to meet people where they are at. And that energy that continued. I wound up owning my family business for a number of years, simultaneously being a social worker and turning that space into the precursor to what they call social entrepreneurship, hand-holding people to starting their own businesses, bringing resources to community. So in my classes, I dispel the myth that there's no separation between micro, meso, and macro social work. When you're working with clients one-on-one, when you are a person with multiple intersectional marginalized identities, we really intrinsically understand the issues that are also impacted by policy, whether that is on a global scale, a national scale, in our city, in our communities, in our homes. And so what I look forward to doing in this community, in this continuing education workshop on February 15th from 10 a.m. to 12 on Zoom, is really unpacking some of what we talked about tonight around ending hunger, what we can do as social workers. I myself am a social worker, but came to this field first as a political activist and community cultivator. And it was a professor in college that said, well, maybe you get your degree in social work. So we know that sometimes we check boxes that the world may need to see so we can continue the work that we've already been doing all the time. So shout out to Jessica. We were in Jumpstart together because AmeriCorps came up from Joel. So thank you for planting the seeds that we were able to grow into. That is such a blessing. So I hope to see you on February 15th from 10 to 12. Amazing to be in community with you, Shanequa, Emilio, Joel, and Jessica, and looking forward to seeing all of you.
Absolutely. And thank you, Pia. And I look forward to your work. And then this, I just wanted to put on my contact information. We also love volunteers. So if you're interested in volunteering sometime to Hunger Free America, that's the volunteer email you can reach us at. And then also if you want to volunteer for the chapter, I'm doing a lot of work with the board to get our volunteer committees. We want our members to be involved in the running of the chapter. So this CARES email is the best way to contact us about that. So I really thank everybody for being here tonight. This was great. I love all the questions. And thank you again to our panelists for just sharing your work with us tonight.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your evening, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.